You ever meet you ever meet somebody who is a version of you from a different life? Have you had that experience? Pretty weird. My guest today is one of those people for me. We've arrived at very similar conclusions and very similar projects in life after going through pretty similar experiences. Um, and it's very rare for me to find that kind of similarity with somebody else, especially like at arriving at these conclusions about life. And some of these conclusions you've heard me say, and some of these conclusions I've yet to reveal. Um, but hopefully, this conversation gets you an idea of how I see the world. Um, it was a great, fun conversation with Pablo Perdomo. He is the co-founder and the CEO of Autentico Media, a podcast production company. And so obviously we're in a similar space, but the way we arrived at the space is also pretty similar. And it was great fun. It was a great conversation, and we have so much overlap in interests. And if you've seen, any of the other interviews, then there's a lot of a common interest with what you think too, because it's all the same kind of stuff: the mind and mythology and AI and brains and philosophy and finding meaning in this really complicated world. Well, thanks again for being here. It's really great to have you. I'm still getting decent at talking to the camera. I'm still not very good at it and still a little weird, but here we are. And well, I kind of have big news too. The pre-order link for my book is out, and I should say the book is the excuse for the podcast. The After all, each episode is an appendix of the book. It's like a reference, like the bonus materials to the sci-fi novel that I wrote, and it's an attempt at expressing everything that I know. And there's not an official release date yet, but targeting late this year. So if you're interested, check out the link below, and I'm excited to hear what you think. Also, check out the other link below because I want to know who you are. I want to know what kinds of stuff you're interested in, apart from the stuff that I've already talked about. I want to know where you're at. What kind of stage in life are you in? Are you going through your Saturn's return? Are you just graduating college? Are you some very senior person at a company? Are you an experienced founder or an experienced investor? I want to know all that. I want to know, or if you're something completely different, I want to know where you're at. That said, I hope you enjoy the conversation. Mr. Pablo Perdomo, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hey Christian, such a pleasure. I'm happy that we just connected a few months ago and things are going outstanding.
Yeah, and I think it's also special for me to have this conversation because meeting you through your cousin and one of my closest friends was sort of like meeting myself. It was discovering one of those doppelgangers from a multiverse version of you, very similar interests, very similar background. Um, well, why don't we start with like where we're at now? What do you do now, Pablo?
Well, Christian, right now I have a podcast production company. This actually I don't know how it happened. It happened because of a personal problem I had a few years ago because I didn't study editing. I didn't study video. I didn't study media. Actually, I studied politics back in college. Then I got an MBA in China. But I was part of the corporate world for a long time, so it just kind of happened.
And I want to explore that journey because there's first of all there's like the wide variety of different experiences that you've had because you've lived in different places, you've created material in at least three different languages that I know, um, and you've lived in so many different places, and then you took this journey from the corporate world to the content creation world to the content creation services world and sort of like are in this really interesting intersection of entrepreneurship, creativity, also self-discipline, also sort of exploring a new media landscape that is evolving and that has changed so much in the past 5 years. So I'd love to explore all that with you. um, why don't we start with like the corporate world and sort of the path that you were in before you decided to sort of think about podcasting more seriously? Why don't we start there?
Sure, sure. Well, I worked for around 6 years in DuPont in the pesticide industry. Again, I'm not a pesticide expert. I didn't study agriculture, but I think this company saw like, okay, this guy, he seems witty. He seems like he learns fast. So let's put him in this internship program and let's see how he does. And that's how I started in the corporate world. It was, I mean, my first work experience. If they were gonna send me to Africa or wherever, I was gonna say yes. I needed the money. I had student loans, like a lot of people do, and I had my own debts. So I started in an internship in DuPont in the pesticide area. And after the first year, they were like, Pablo, there's an opportunity and we think you should take it, but it's not in your country. And I'm like, I'm okay if it's not in my country. Actually, it's in the DR, it's in the Dominican Republic, and you're going to be in charge of the Caribbean. So, I mean, it sounded excellent. And it was for a while, like a flying to these all amazing islands. I mean, it was like pirate work, going hopping from one island to
Mm-hmm.
another, checking clients, going to the beaches. It was great until I had a huge burnout. I was flying every week. Like the taxi would pick me up at 4:30 a.m. on Monday, and they would drop me in my apartment like at 10:30 on a Friday. I mean, it was cool the first year, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember something clicked. Um, I think it was my third year on the job. I was flying to Saint Lucia, uh, and the airplane, like they told us, hey, listen, we're gonna be flying in smaller airplanes like this airline because they're saving money or something. We're gonna be flying in smaller airplanes. The turbulence, you might feel it a bit stronger, but it is because the smaller airplanes, and it's hurricane season from May to November, and I mean almost the whole year. And I was like, well, all right. And I had a horrible experience, my friend. I had a horrible experience. It was a really bad turbulence. And I remember in the turbulence, I was like thinking, my gosh, my boss doesn't know where I am. The company for sure doesn't care what happens to me. I mean, they care that I do the sale or I hit the KPI or the budget. And well, nothing happened. Of course, I'm here with you right now. But I remember when the plane landed, I was so frustrated. I was like, man, it's 10 p.m. at night. I'm so tired. I just spent the last hour and a half like horrible. And I started questioning myself like, is this worth it? Like, do I want to be remembered? Oh, Pablo, the cool kid that came and sold us a lot of fertilizer. Ah, I mean, I had a like, I don't know if it was an existential crisis or something, but that night I couldn't sleep because I started questioning myself of what am I gonna do the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that happens a lot, Christian. I don't know if you have it, that you question yourself and you put it on perspective. A lot of times people don't put it on perspective. Like, do I see myself doing this in 5 years? Like, how is the Christian of the future gonna be acting like in 5 years doing the same thing? Am I aspiring to have the job of my boss? And does that seem attractive? If it is, well, you're in the correct path. But if you see your boss like having, all this, my boss had a lot of health complication problems because of stress. So I would
Oh
be
no.
seeing him like a reflection, and I would be like, I don't know if I want that life.
Hmm. No, I think there's something there that is like it's very we find ourselves often in a path just because like I don't know we grow up in these systems, right, that sort of like encourage certain behaviors, and you almost like default to certain paths, and then you don't really extrapolate from when you're in the path and you're doing the daily, the daily routine. Does this daily routine take me to where I want to go? And so you're sort of, and this is a like also this is a tough thing to do to oneself, because most of the time the answer is no, right? Like most of the time the you of the future is not the you of the actual future based on what you're doing, right? And
Correct.
so and so, but this is a very difficult thing, and often it takes some kind of life intervention. uh I mean, I'm sad that it was like a life or death moment in the in an airplane. uh but it then really frames, like, okay, what is it that I'm trying to get out of my life? Or I think even what hit even harder for me when I had my contemplation moments was my youth. There's something even more powerful about it, that youth slips away, and there's like, now I have energy that I take for granted, that I hope to not, um, not leave behind in the future, right? um, and I think this is it's an important thing, because it happens also often, a few years out of college, where you're sort of in this environment where, the blend of academic pursuit and professional pursuit is the same. You're studying something, but that is your job essentially. um, and then a
Correct.
few years out, you stop learning as much, or you start having to be more proactive about learning, and then you realize, oh, maybe something's going on here. um, Okay, so you had this moment, you had that sleepless night, you were thinking about it, and then it still took a bit for you to take the jump. What was the next phase like?
I, I think the problem is you don't know what you want. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people doesn't know what they want. I mean, and it's okay, and it's okay not to know. It's okay to be 50 and that you're still searching for what you want. For some people it comes earlier. For some people you get the luck of finding your purpose, your path early on, but for so many people they spend their whole life searching. Um, and it's all right, but I just didn't know what I wanted. So at the time, I'm not disappointed, I'm not frustrated, I'm not mad at my experience in the corporate world, because it taught me what I don't want. So what happened after that terrible experience? I was there still for 2 years, and I started thinking like, what on earth should I do now? I need to be working. So while I was working, I was thinking, okay, what's my next move? And I had a girlfriend at the time, and we decided to start a company. We decided to start a company in Germany. That was a hell of a twist, but she was until here of the Caribbean. Me too. Not only the Caribbean, but the corporate world. We had this entrepreneur spirit, so we wanted to try something in another country. She was French. She studied in Germany, and she mentioned, "Listen, there's if you're gonna solve a national problem for Germany, there's a fund that they could like sponsor us the first year or second, if we're gonna solve a national problem. Like they'll help us out." So the problem at the time was that Germany attracts around 200 or 300,000 international students every year, but they have this brain drain. I mean, the people that go there to study their master's degree, go there to study their PhD, leaves after 6 months. Not all of them, but many of them. So the problem was that they didn't have nowhere to stay. You would say,
Hmm.
how is that possible? They don't have where to stay. And yeah, actually, they don't. Because everybody wants to sleep in a dorm. The
Hmm.
dorms are actually very good, but there's a 6 month waiting period for you to get into the dorm. So there's a 6 month window where they don't know what to
Yeah.
do.
Where?
They don't have the money to pay an Airbnb or a hotel or a hostel or whatever. So they stay at friends if they have friends. Uh, so we came up with this idea. that we will help them out. Um, we will connect them to around 3,000. We had a network of 3,000 families. So we would connect them with a family that had an extra room, and we would have a commission for allocate them in this extra room. And then we would add extra services, like if you want to study German, if you want help with some permits, if you don't have a health insurance. So we will commission in all of them, and that was the idea at the time. Started working, but unfortunately, COVID hit, so
Oof.
Everything froze. That it was a whole experience because COVID hit the relationship, hit the company, hit the plans,
Mm,
and we needed to go backwards. I went back to
mm,
Mexico because that's where my parents live, and started reinventing myself again. So
mm,
then you have like this corporate world, I
mhm,
would say Western corporate world, that trying to do a company in Europe, and then
mhm.
I'm back to square one in Latin America because, well, COVID was hard for everyone. I don't know
Oh
where were
yeah.
you at the time?
I was in an interesting spot too. My now fiance was in med school in Chicago, and I was in Palo Alto. And when COVID hit, that was a trigger for me to move to Chicago, and then that was also like my own sort of like COVID chapter of life. Um, but there's like, and I think now it's easier to sort of finally address how intense COVID was psychologically for most people. I think there was a lot of like dissociative feelings maybe around like, what am I supposed to do? How does the world react to this? How does this happen in the world? And I think like enough time has passed now that we can finally sort of like let those questions, air out and process the answers. Um, but yeah, I could just imagine in your position where sort of like it catches you in a different continent, in a different like in a context that was taking off but hadn't really taken off, and then now it can't take off. And there's also the personal dimension too, where you're in a relationship, but the relationship is feeling strained by it, and nobody feels at home, and nobody feels like there's. I mean, like I could only imagine that crisis, and then having gone from the let's call it more stable corporate world, where sort of there's a predictable like, oh, if I keep doing this, I'll have my boss's job at some point,
Right.
to the definitely more uncertain and brave in entrepreneurship world, where you're trying to sort of like think about how you can add value to society, and you take on the risk of being wrong. So if you're wrong, something is you messed up somewhere. Um, and that is an incredibly brave thing. And then on top of that, to then be hit with like this crisis, and then feel like, oh my gosh, uh, I'm
And
now back to
Christian,
yeah.
in there, let me interrupt you there. Like, there was a whole thing going on, like in my head, in my heart. I started having like um, not panic attacks, but yeah, maybe like panic attacks, like arrhythmia, having trouble to breathe, to sleep. So I started journaling. I think I mentioned to you this before. I started journaling, but my hand was too slow for what my brain was doing and what my mouth does. So this became the answer. I started recording
Mm,
myself. I started recording my thoughts. I started recording my feelings. Why? Because, well, actually, kind of my thoughts and my mouth, they're not at the same speed, but kind of. So I started recording my feelings, not only because this was much better, but also I didn't have money for a therapist back at the time.
mm,
Um, I was I was in Germany. Eh, My German was not great, so it was COVID. I mean, this was like my only way out, right? Like recording
mm,
stuff. And after recording, I don't know, like 30 entries, I remember a friend of mine told me like, "Yo, dude, because I told him, I'm doing this type of audio journaling or whatever. And he said something like, you should share it. I'm like, no, man,
Mm,
how am I going to share it? This is too personal. He was like, Pablo, you're in Germany. Here, you're a number, you're a letter. People in Guatemala, they're far away. They're minding their own business. Who knows? Maybe someone would benefit from them. You don't know. So that's when I shared a bunch of them in Spotify, and I was too ashamed of putting my name. So,
mm,
but you have the experience that when you have to upload a podcast, you have to register an email. So I invented an email just to upload it. And I remember like 2 days later, I met my friend again and I was like, yeah, you did it. Yeah, I did it. So how's it going? And I'm like, I don't know. I just did it because you were so stubborn. And I remember so good that 3 weeks later or a month later, I started getting like an email a week, but from people of
mm,
Latin America who were listening to the content in Spanish and saying like, Pablo, thank you for putting words to the depression I had. Pablo, thank you for talking about this existential crisis like you did. So this was like the breaking point, like, wow, this is actually a medium I could use to connect with people and create an audience and go beyond social media, but this is something else, this is something new. So
mhm,
that's where I saw that your being vulnerable was a superpower.
mhm. Well, that is amazing that it came out that way. That sort of like the thing that helped you process what you were going through helped other people process what they were going through. Um, and but there's like so many interesting things with that discovery because it's not like there's a lot of layers to that process that I think are worth exploring, and there's stuff that I've sort of just started going through myself with finding your voice and finding your tone and sort of like figuring out if this is if you even if you're not going to share, there's like a process where just the recording, the red light sort of like does this to you where sort of like you're all of a sudden thinking about what you're saying in a different way. um, and a lot of us, certainly that was the case for me, wasn't sure how to even begin wording the feelings or the message that I wanted to send out, and that's a very good exercise to go through. It's like, okay, if this is going to be recorded and this is going to be, you know, uh, a memory of me, a trace of me when I'm long gone, then what is the version that I want to present, even though I may be in a position that I don't want to be in. I don't want to be
Correct.
confused. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be um, whatever it is, um, and and I think that's a powerful exercise, and it's amazing that you got the feedback from people. So what, for instance, one of the things that I struggled with was like, okay, how do I um, have the most stimulating conversations that I can, um, and also sort of leave my personality as part of those conversations. But I never even like began addressing the big monster in the room of addressing the audience directly. And so like it wasn't until the last episode that I finally sort of did a little monologue and addressed the listener directly. Out of this sense of sheer terror, it's just like, okay, who am I to stand out, in the noise? Um, but it's also one of those things, you rip the band-aid off and then, okay, so now you can sort of think about how to iterate and how do you get better at it. But how did you stack the problems? So like there was the emotional sort of figuring out your own emotions as a baseline, and then sort of it becomes something else. What does that process look like?
I have I have this thing like always on my mind that we're similar to everybody, Christian. I mean, we're all the same. We're looking for happiness and we don't want problems. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, you're going to connect just by those two common denominators. And I think putting yourself out, that takes balls, that takes courage. And you're saying to whoever is listening, like, Amen. I'm the same as you. I'm having this human problems that everybody has. I'm sure you're depressed here or in Nigeria or in Morocco. Doesn't matter where you are. So having the humanity present, having being you vulnerable, um, like I told you, that's a superpower because you're gonna connect with everybody because nobody's perfect. Everybody's tumbling into problems, emotional or financial or whatever. And I think you have to do a real good job addressing your question to to do a compartmentalization of where things go and what's the image you want to present. There's a good book. I think you should read it. It's called "Still Like an Artist" from Austin Kleon, and
Hmm.
he says that uh, you are the well, you're the result of the average of the people that you hang around with, but that works also in a digital way. You're also the result of the five persons that you consume their content from. And what you can do to find your voice, if you aspire to be like them or they inspire you, like start copying them, and in the way you're gonna find your voice. Eh, of course, you're not gonna be the same replica of this person's, right? But in the way you're imitating, you're gonna stumble upon your true self, what you truly want. So I think that's something very interesting for someone that wants to start in the content world. For example, I don't agree having two personas, like one here
Yeah.
and one in the computer and one in social media. That's too tiring and that's not authentic. You cannot have this facade in in a social media platform. So
And
you need to
that's
the
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
I just want to double click on that because there's an interesting point there that when you so there's like many different ways of engaging with digital media, right? Like there's like most of us are mostly consumers. We're scrolling and we're maybe liking and we're commenting, but we only really comment on friends stuff. We don't rarely comment on stranger stuff. And then there's like all these like behaviors that are based on the platform. So the way you behave on Twitter is different than the way you behave on Instagram, different than the way you behave on YouTube. But then when you start thinking about being a producer or like putting content out there, and this applies to whether you want to just make something for people to see or if you're trying to drive a marketing thing, uh, you tend to emulate the behaviors of those platforms, even though those behaviors are very different from what you would normally do. Like you as a person, you're in a consumer mode. You don't do the things that a YouTuber does or an influencer does. And there's like this dissociation where it's like I'm not like that. So. But that goes to I think the very important point what you just casually mentioned of finding your true self, which I think is very similar to finding your own voice and finding what you really want and what you're really trying to do. Um, and that looks very different for different people. Well, you mean your what you really want looks very different. I think what you said before is also very true. Is like your true self is very similar to everybody else. It may be the same true self, um, and um, but that is a non-trivial exercise of saying, no, these are not the ways that I'm going to behave. This is not how I'm going to do things. This is what I am. This is like my core emotional journey. This is my core philosophy. This is my core product value that I want to add in the world. Um, so let's talk about getting there because I agree with you that like you don't get there until you make some kind of risk jump. Like you put yourself out there, not necessarily in the like you post stuff online, but you could be like, okay, I'm in this phase of my life and I'm writing a book, or I'm in this phase of my life and I'm searching for opportunities. I'm sort of like you publicly declare I'm doing a thing that requires risk, and then you put yourself the pressure. What was that for you when you're in this in between moment of you're recording stuff, it starts getting out there, it starts getting traction, and then you're like, yes. Or did this happen before? Or was this part of like the recording already? Was it by the time you were recording, you had already figured this stuff out?
I think something important before you start creating content or start going in this world is you have to set your objectives. If your objectives are views, if your objectives are to be popular, to be viral, well, yeah, you need to talk TikTok, you need to talk LinkedIn, you need to talk
Hmm.
Facebook. If that's your objective, that was, I don't know, that was not my objective. I wanted somehow to replicate the content that I like. And the thing that we're doing right now, that's the content I consume and that I have always consumed, like deep talk, deep conversations, talking about philosophy, sports, productivity, whatever. That was the content I was consuming, and I wanted to make it for myself. I want to do this type of content. Um, but my objective at first was not the views, was not the likes. Still, it isn't, because I'm telling you, this video is not gonna be viral. We're not creating things for the algorithm just to suck us in and be viral. We're doing things that we like. And why did we connect that, you and me? Is because we resonated with the topics that you mentioned and that I talk about. So that was part of my objective. Like Alain de Botton, one of the great philosophers
Hmm.
of modern world, he says one of your objectives should be to find the others. I mean, find the
Hmm.
others, man. Find that community that you resonate with. So that was part of my objective of one of the podcasts, is to find the others, find those people that I can collaborate, that I can grow with. So it's important for you to have your objectives clear. And my objective was never to have the views. Of course, it would be interesting. It would be satisfactory if I get a lot of views and I'm viral and whatever. But you also have to think that maybe your content is not for everybody. Maybe it's a niche. Maybe it's for some types of persons that are similar to you. And that's okay also, you know? So I thought, but if we create good content with good quality, I didn't have the underdog experience, for example, that I started with a phone and then I put a light and then I had an extra camera and an extra microphone. And you see the evolution of of a show. No, I started with good quality, man, good cameras, good microphone, good studio, because I was thinking if Christian or his friend or his father or his best friend is going to invest 30 seconds of his time, not an hour that maybe this conversation is going to be, but 30 seconds of his time, I want him to have quality sound, quality video, and for me to say something that maybe he will connect with. And maybe eventually there's going to be someone that likes it so much that wants something similar, and he's going to go like, hey, Christian, I actually liked the conversation you had with Pablo, and you don't care if it had 20 views, but it hit a spot on that guy, and now he wants to hire you or to collaborate or to create something. And that's similar to our story, I think, that we didn't came across because you're a big influencer in LA or in Singapore, whatever, but you were like, hey, he's doing something that I kind of resonate with what he's doing, so let's create something, you know?
Yeah, I think there's something beautiful to that line about finding the others, and it's. I think one of the beautiful things about the modern world is that we can find the others basically anywhere in the planet, and sort of like you have these distribution mechanisms that otherwise would have been completely impossible. And if anybody out there is resonating with this, like let us know. I mean, like we're excited to find the others. The reason we connected is because we're interested in the same intersection of interesting things. Like there's something about the mind. There's something about philosophy. There's something about the search for meaning that I think is worth exploring. And that we're all doing it, even if you don't realize it. And we're all, if you don't realize it, you're probably, replacing that search with something else that may not be productive or may be less ideal than what it could be. Um, and that's an amazing thing. And okay, so now you're in a position where the podcast is becoming something, and you're thinking about, okay, this could be my thing. This could be the thing that I do now. How does that part happen? Where sort of where it goes from a podcast to a podcast production company.
I'm just gonna comment on something you just said. I think it's really important, Chris, and maybe we're gonna go a bit woo woo here, but it's the truth of what I think you think and I think. You mentioned something that if you're not asking these type of questions, maybe you're distracting yourself with something else, and that's for everyone. We live sometimes in a passive state, when we're just receiving information from Netflix, from YouTube, from wherever, and we're not asking these questions. And I think Plato was the one of our heroes that mentioned like a life that you're not contemplating is not a life worth living. You need to contemplate this type of things, and you need to search, like never stop searching what really makes you grow, what really makes you have that light bulb shine. So for anyone that's listening to this, I mean, we would love to connect with you guys, and if you haven't found what you want to do in life, maybe we can find it together. I don't know, but in a group is much better, in a team, to have this accountability buddy. I think it always works. Now, answering your question, uh, I came back. Sorry again, I came back from Mexico. Then I came to Guatemala because Huawei, the telecommunications Chinese company, hired me as a marketing director. And while I was working for them, I was creating a podcast. It's called Alma Artesana. The name in English is Artisan Soul. So while I was working there, I was creating this podcast. Now it was gonna be video and audio, not only audio. I wanted to break this. Now we're gonna do it with video. Um, it was not an easy choice because when you live in Latin America, in a small country, you're always worried about what people are gonna say, how are you gonna seem, the reputation, society, and whatever. And when I came to Guatemala, I had a good and a bad feeling. Let's start with the bad. The bad feeling was that after 12 years of living abroad, came back, and I couldn't connect with people. I
Yeah.
had the feeling that people they didn't care about me. Um, like I don't mean nothing to them anymore. Uh, I mean, that was a bit fatalist, and that was a bit exaggerated. But the thing is, everybody has their own problems, right? Everybody lives in their own ecosystem with their mortgage, with their kids, their wife, um, her mother-in-law, and whatever. People live in this little world. That made me a bit sad because I felt that I was a bit alone in my own country.
Mm.
But the great part about it, the amazing part was that it gave me a lot of freedom to create. You know
Mm.
the scary part of what are they gonna say? I just didn't have it anymore. I was like,
Mm.
everybody's so busy with their own problems that if I do a video where I'm naked talking about golf, they just
Mm-hmm.
won't care. So that gave me a
Mm-hmm.
lot of freedom to create. So that's when I said let's put video into this podcast. So I was working for the Chinese and I was creating this podcast, and a lot of the guests I had in Alma Artesana, a lot of the guests, they were like, "Oh, Pablo, this is so cool. Would you do this for my company? Um, would you do this kind of show for me? Like, I want to talk about astrology. I want to talk about books. I want to talk about um, I don't know, systems. Is it possible you do it for me?" And I was like, because I had an editor, I had this guy working the mics, the lights. So it was an expensive hobby at the time, but because the Chinese were paying good also. But I was like, no, man, sorry, this is just a hobby. Like, that would be great, but I'm sorry, no, this is just a hobby. And it was like 10 persons asking the same thing. And I was like, because they were impressed because of the setting we had. And when I left Huawei, which that's another story, like me, corporate world, is crazy. But corporate world, the Chinese corporate world, that's like corporate world and crack. That's on another speed and other manners also. So when I left, the organic thing to do was, okay, now I'm gonna create. I mean, I see that I love podcasting. I love creating content. Let's create content for other people, and we're gonna package it as a podcast because actually some of my guests have been asking for it. So that's how the company started.
That's there's a couple of things there that I think are very interesting. There's um, sort of the economies of scale when you already have an infrastructure for processing the stuff, and it's non-trivial. I think like we take as consumers of digital media, we take for granted the amount of steps in the process of making a video like this. There's the you have to find the right guests, you have to find the right theme, you have to prepare it right, you have to set up the recording, you have to set up the camera and lighting. If you do that, you have to test the mic, you have to make sure that their mic works, you have to sort of then execute an enjoyable personable conversation where you're giving the guest space and you're having sort of like, it's a beautiful moment, honestly. I mean, that part is my favorite. And then comes, okay, then you're done, you have to thank the guests, you have to sort of remind them when the episode's going to come out. Yeah, so there's like a lot of steps to it. And once you have the infrastructure, then you realize, oh wow, you can actually process a lot more when you have the infrastructure. But then building out the infrastructure as you're in the process of building it out is very crazy. um, there's another layer there which I think is, which I'm happy to touch on, because it's like I was surprised at how much production has to go into this stuff. Of what I think is very interesting that you started doing very well, that is, you found this nexus that is a hub for all of the things that you're interested in. So you're interested in philosophy, and so then you were able to say, okay, let's have a philosophy themed podcast, and like you will just like speak your thoughts on philosophy and have conversations about philosophy. But then you also love sports, and they don't seem to be in the same universe. And so you're like, okay, let's do another one. Let's have another one that is a sports themed podcast. And um, and I think that's really great. I think that's really awesome in the sense that like you're able to find a platform to then express the entirety of who you are. And that may be one of the biggest things that I felt, when I was figuring out what to do, is what is the occupation? I don't even want to say job, but it's like, how do I spend my time such that I am exercising all of the things that make me me, right? Um, or how do I integrate the fact that I like sports with the fact that I like philosophy, or the fact that I like music, and like how does that all fit into this picture of my life? Um, and it's awesome that you found it with a podcast, and the podcast production company, that is now like this machine that you can use to deploy these ideas pretty rapidly. um, so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about like then saying vertical sort of specific lines within the podcast production company that are sort of like artistic um, expressions of you, and how that manifests into your workflow and your life.
With you mentioning all the steps, brother, we are undervalued. Oh my gosh, you're so right with making the guest comfortable, doing the script, cameras, audio, post production, distribution, art, captions. It's crazy. It is
Descriptions, tags.
description, SEO, website, where are you sending the traffic? Is your guest okay? I've had episodes where I thought it was great and everything went smooth, and I have a call 2 weeks after, and it's the guest saying like, listen, now that I'm thinking about it, actually, I'm sorry, man, but I'm not comfortable with this and this and this that I said. I prefer you don't you don't publish it. And I'm like, okay. I mean, there's so many things that go wrong. I tell you, once I had a one of these, like a disc with
Oh
30
no.
episodes, and the disc had a mechanical problem. Man, I had to spend like $1,500 to fix it. I sent it to Washington because they couldn't do it in Guatemala. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, everybody says, yeah, you should save it in the cloud. And yeah, you're right. But the internet in Latin America is not as fast, man. You have to wait like, I don't know, 12 hours for this episode to upload. But yeah, I mean, we're undervalued, brother. So everybody listening to this, guys, it's hard work. We have fun, but it's hard work. So what you were saying before, um, so actually that happened out of my person. Like I broke my personality in little pieces. Not my personality, but my interests. So I love football. I love music. I love books. I love philosophy. So I was at the time that I needed to create a lot of content to have a big portfolio for the production company. Like we had some clients, but I felt that the content we were producing for them, it was not enough to create a robust portfolio. So we created a soccer or football podcast, depending where you're listening from, and where we were talking about transfers, rumors, European ranking scores. Then we had a book podcast where we'll be talking about the book that I was reading that month. We had a philosophy one where that was only audio, where we will be talking about urban philosophy and reality.
Mm.
So actually, at the end, it had a lot of objectives. I was expressing myself in different topics, and we were creating the content that would be like our portfolio when we meet a client. Like, listen, we're the creators of
Mm.
this, and this, and they would go like, yeah, Pablo, but anyone can record themselves talking about how Barcelona won or how Chelsea won last weekend. And I was, maybe, yeah, but not with this quality, and not having this collaboration with a lot of digital newspapers in Guatemala. So what happened? We created all this content, but we did a special alliances with communications company in the country, so they would give us more traffic. So it was not only a podcast; it was a podcast that had the strength of newspapers of these companies out there. So you would have like this podcast sponsored by or in alliance by. So it had a multi-purpose thing actually, and it was not hard because in some shows I was in camera, and some shows I was behind camera, but it was not hard creating the scripts and the idea because they were practically my interests. Like if they told you, Christian, let's talk about a podcast about the editorial business or the book business or the music business and music hobbies, maybe you won't have a hard time creating the show because there are things that you're passionate about.
No, not at all. And that was one thing that and this is also a good chance to talk about sort of side quests in life. Um, my whole thing started when I wrote a novel, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna make my thesis of life. Like this is gonna be how I synthesize everything that I know into into something that is consumable in not one sitting, but in a book. Um, and that was the thing that allowed me to say, okay, now I'm in this project where I actually have to express all of my interests. And then that became the lightning rod to then say, okay, yeah, I could do this forever. I could just keep pumping these books out because I figured out a formula where I can sort of like oh, I want to make a portrait of San Francisco where I live now and where like life took me. And so then that's easy. I have a framework to do it. I have a vehicle to do it. And and then in a novel, it just so happens that you can put a lot of layers on this stuff. Like you can put philosophy, you can talk about music, you can talk about stuff, and you're hidden under the cover of fiction. So you don't have to be authoritative in a field. You just have to sort of like deliver a worthwhile experience. And if there's lessons there, that's awesome. But like, so discovering that was amazing for me, and that became my thing. And I think of, well, it 100% is. This podcast is an extension of the content of the book. So like every appendix is a slice of what is contained in the novel. And so it's sort of like this gift that keeps on giving kind of thing where, uh, like there's a thing that serves as like the nexus for everything that I do, that then spins off this, this podcast that then spins off, like connections with you and the type of opportunities that we're looking at. And it's just so incredibly fun. Okay, that's my long-winded resonance with your answer about when you're doing what you like, it's easy. Um, there's the other part of it though, that was the side gig thing. That was like you also wrote a book, but it's a very different
Yes,
kind of book.
and actually, I'm here in my phone because you brought into my mind. There's a movie called The Death Poet Society, and there I don't have the, let me see the quote right now, but um, well, I don't have it right now, but I
I
remember
think
uh,
go for it.
I remember that there's a part where it says, in modern world, something like this. I'm going to paraphrase it. In modern world, we need engineers, we need scientific people for the world to work, but we need also poets that show us what real love is. We need musicians to help us feel the world with another sense. Like, and this guy talks about these other realms that exist: writing, poetry, um, art. You know, that's also a way of, and I think you creating your book, it's a way, it's a noble pursuit to transcend. It's a noble pursuit to immortalize your brain, your thoughts. Eh, those are things worth pursuing. I feel like a podcast. I mean, also sometimes when I think about all the interviews that you've done and that I've done, I think this will be a medium of transcending. Also, I don't know if this conversation is going to be heard by a little kid in 20 years, and he's going to be like, ah, actually, I'm going through this right now, and this actually makes sense. Also, a book, and it's sad that sometimes we're blind to this type of results. You know what the impact it has in people. Um let's say a video, a podcast video, maybe it has 10 views, but you don't know if those, out of those 10, you actually had a good impact or a positive impact in one person out of those 10. Could be even a family member. So it's crazy, it's
And
crazy.
yeah, and there's even more layers because there's also the fact that you're proving that something is possible, right? You're proving that that there is a thing that wouldn't be done that you decided to do and you did it. So it's like a marathon in my book where it's like not my it's just in my interpretation where you don't need to run a marathon. Nobody needs to run 42 kilometers or 26 miles, but you do it because you're trying to prove something to someone, whether it's yourself or someone else. And then there's something there that I think is like very personally fulfilling. And then there's the layer after that where, but then you meet with the real world again, sort of like you exist in this like very touchy feely space, and then you connect with the real world, and that's like a traumatic experience. But I think it's like part of what makes it worth it is that then you're like in a position where you're negotiating with how the world receives it and then how much value it's really getting to people and how that value is getting compensated to you and like are you getting the signs that you wanted, like if the things that you're doing are achieving the outcome you want, are you getting the right signals, right? And then that is a fascinating sort of process too. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think my thoughts um, are different. Um, I I did a divorce with the outcome of many of my projects. I
Hmm.
understood that I love having this conversation with you, and this is the process, and this is what I love, and I understand this. And when I understand this, I also understand that this is going to be sustainable, that this is going to be a life project. I don't know if that's part of your ecosystem that you're creating with the book and the podcast, but for example, Alma Artesana, Artisan Soul, when I understood it's a life project, there's no timeline. It
Mm.
can go viral in 10, 15, 20 years, 2 months. I don't care. I am divorced from from the outcome. The process is the thing that I enjoyed having the conversation with you. I don't know if it's gonna have 1 or 100 views, but I know I have a new friend. I know I have someone I can collaborate with. I know I was inspired, and maybe this conversation gave me the idea for my next business or project. I mean, there's multiple variables that can happen. Of course, it would be nice if this is crazy popular, but if it doesn't, I mean, eh, I'm not gonna die for it if it doesn't go so popular. But there's a big but. I have other income streams and I don't depend on the podcast. I mean, if
Mm.
you depend on the podcast and you need 10,000 subscribers and you need 4,000, 6,000 hours of views because you need YouTube to pay you, that's another ball game. That's another ball game totally.
You reminded me of this quote by Kepler. I don't know if you've heard. Um, so Kepler is he has this line where apparently he found something. I think it's when he found about the elliptical nature of orbits and planets, and so he discovered the calculus of how the elliptical orbits happen, and he has a line that says, "The die is cast, the book is written, to be read either now or by posterity. I care not which. I may well wait for a century for a reader, as God has waited 6,000 years for an observer."
Wow.
It's
Li-
so good. It's so good.
Listen to that. Oh my gosh.
There's
And we're
there's an there's a really crazy poem by Edgar Allan Poe that quotes Kepler. I highly recommend it. It's called Eureka, and 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 Edgar Allan Poe is going through a similar sort of like transcendent experience, and he quotes Kepler because it's like one of the few phrases that he can find that resonates with what he's feeling. And that is a mighty feeling. I mean, like it's a very special feeling. I hope everybody feels one day.
and because of this that you're saying, I can predict which of my clients are going to stay for a second season, like which
Huh.
of them I'm going to produce to them a second season, because some of them come with the wrong objectives. Some of them, they
Mm.
want to do a podcast to become viral. Some of them want to create a podcast to get more views. And I don't know if they're the biggest influencer in the country, maybe that will work. But if not, I know they will be discouraged and they will not do a second season. But when I hear someone that they come and their pitch is, I want to do an investment. I want to do a content investment. I'm thinking of the long run. I'm thinking of interviewing in the second season this type of persons. So you're like, okay, this guy or this girl understands how the format and how the market of podcasting works. It's not a short term thing because they come
It's
with
a,
wrong objectives, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a very different game, and it's a sort of a product of the different nature of the world today. I think like I have a hard time grappling with how media has changed, have changed, brands have changed, marketing has changed, and I think that there's like we'll begin to see the effects of that this year more than anything, when I think like the election in the US will be like more influenced by the online world than the traditional media world.
Right.
We'll see sort of like AI and how AI is going to get like more people more leverage, which means that there's going to be fewer jobs, and so there's going to be more demand for this type of new business. I think it's easy to overlook how big the change is, um, and and it's exciting to be sort of a citizen of the conversation. Like even if it's very early days still. But let's talk about your book. I want to know more about it because I know you wrote a book. I know you wrote it in German, and I know that it's for kids. But that's as far as I know. And I wanted to hear sort of what was that side quest about.
That was crazy. I was learning German a few years ago, and my teacher, like, a homework he gave out to everyone, like, hey, create a short story for kids. And I created a story about where the hero of the story is Saturn, and and the moons surrounding Saturn are, well, his parents. And in this story, Saturn, like, misbehaves and he does something wrong, and the moons, they go and punish Saturn, and it's like a funny but
Hmm.
also philosophical story. And I brought this story to my teacher, and he was like, "Cool, do another one." I'm like, no, I mean, that's for extra credit, or I mean, no, yeah, maybe, but come on, you should do another one. It's cool. And he was like very insisting, and I was like, okay. So I did another one where Saturn uh, plays, where Saturn goes to the meditation class of Mars because he has anger management problem. Mars has anger management problems.
That's great. Yep.
So so I came back and I gave him the story, and he was like, great, do another one. And I'm like, okay, this was fun. But and he was like, Pablo, let me tell you something. I'm a teacher, yeah, but I'm a PhD in literature. I've written like 10 books, and I'm actually a scout for new talents for a publishing house, and their main target are kids. So I think you have something here, but it's still a bit too deep sometimes. Like, the stories are authentic, original, but it's a bit too deep for kids. So go and think of another thing, and maybe we can do a pitch to the publishing house, and it will be a cool story. You being an immigrant and blah blah blah. Okay, so I was talking to a friend of mine. His name is Gabriel from Guatemala, and I was showing him the stories, and he was like, "Yeah, man, this is too deep. Too, I mean, this is not for kids, man." So he came into the team like I would create some of the stories, and he would put the kids parts in it. He would put a bit more of laughter and a relaxing part of the story, so it would be more digestible for kids. So uh, we created like three stories, and we went with Ralph. Ralph is my teacher, and he said like, okay, let's make a pitch. um, we made them first in Spanish, then I translated in English, then I made them in German, then I sent it to Ralph, and Ralph, he did an editing part. He was like, okay, it's good, but I need to edit it. Then we took it to the publishing house, and they were like, cool, these three stories work, we want 10 because we want to create a book. So we created 10 stories, man. 10 stories about astronomy where the hero is Saturn, and he has different type of adventures with all of them. I mean, Pluto, the smallest planet, he has like, um, he's afraid of public speaking, right? So because he's the smallest one and whatever, so Saturn helps him. Mars has anger management problems. Venus, because of the Greek goddess, she's the most beautiful of the team. So she had a boyfriend and she had some problems with him. Saturn also helped her. Um, the director, or the teacher of the school, was the sun, and I
Hmm.
remember the sun used to have a dancing class. So you would say like a dancing class for planets, and actually the sun will give them like two lessons, and one of them would be that they have to move in a certain way to clean their atmosphere, like the atmosphere surrounding
Mm,
the
mm.
planets. They do a certain movement, so they clean their atmosphere. And actually, that's one of the characteristics according to, I don't know, NASA or whatever, that for you to be a planet, you have to be able to clean your atmosphere. So you have like actually true scientific facts in the stories. And after 2 years, we made the book, and it's sold right now in many libraries in Germany, in Amazon Germany, and Amazon Austria. And that was another thing, Christian. Like, you don't know you can do something until you do it. You're like, wow, uh, wow. I mean, a book in German for kids? That's a bit surrealistic, my friend.
Yeah, it is very random. It is extremely
It is
random.
extremely random. And there was an interesting talk with the publishing house. You know, I was like, let's do it in Spanish for my country and all the countries in Latin America. And they showed me like this map of where in the world is profitable for you to sell books.
Mm,
And Latin America, unfortunately, was not. It didn't show there because our, I don't know how you say it in English, but your the index of, I mean, the number of books you read per year is not big enough. It would be attractive for you to publish a book in Canada, in the US, in Germany, in France. There were like 8 countries that they would target because they know it would sell there well. So that was crazy. That was very
that
random.
is wild. That's so funny. Also, I'm very curious. Why is Saturn the protagonist?
Wow. Man, that's a great question. I don't know, because maybe I resonated with the name when I created the short story, and I was like, Saturn has its rings, it's different. You can make like short names like Satu. You can create many things
Hmm.
with, and has like very uncommon characteristics when you compare it to the other ones. And maybe because that was the first guy I did the short story about. Um, but yeah, I think it just came organically.
That's awesome. I mean, um, you know what? And I think this is like enough of a segue where we can finally stop talking about something and we could just go wherever it goes. Because I've been excited about just talking about philosophy with you and just like geeking out about this stuff. I've always found um, the overlap between astronomy and Greek mythology and astrology and all these different layers of mythology about how our solar system works and sort of that defining our world every day to be so fascinating. Um, and the reason I ask about Saturn is because usually Saturn is the bad guy. Saturn is usually seen as a tyrant,
Huh.
and so, well, I why don't we just kick off our very nerdy geek out with, just
I
because we're right next to it, Greek mythology or wherever you want to go.
I was impacted. I was. It blew my mind. This TV show, Cosmos, with Neil deGrasse Tyson, when it zoomed out. You know, like you had Earth, then all the planets, Milky Way, galaxy, constellations. Like it did the zooming out, and you feel so small, man. You feel so insignificant. You're so small. You're like, how on earth there's not going to be more things alive, aliens, whatever, because we're such a tiny part. I remember that day so much, man. I was in the DR and I had a lazy
Hmm.
Sunday, and I had this nerdy thing with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I would listen to everything he does. I bought some of his books that I don't understand, but I just have them. And when I saw Cosmos, I was like, wow. I was just amazed. I was at awe. Damn, there's so much. There's so much.
I mean, yeah, it like it really is breathtaking. I mean, the enormity of the world. I mean, it's like just the enormity of Earth is breathtaking. Just like how big planet Earth really is as a human is insane. Like we live under this illusion that the world is kind of small because we live, in a world where commercial aviation is commonplace, right? But if you think about it, just like 200, 300 years ago, going somewhere really far is so far. And then you take that to the solar system, or you take that to the galaxies, and you just have to say, like, man, like, this is a very privileged position that we're in,
And
by chance or design. We are in an incredibly unique position to look out into the universe.
and yet we are worrying if a video hits some views or if we hit a sales quota, being so freaking small. So I was there in my apartment in the DR watching at Cosmos, and I'm like, and I'm worrying about Monday talking to my boss about my sales quota, if I'm gonna hit my target, when I'm so freaking small, and when that problem is so freaking small and it's not mine. I mean, I'm working my ass off so the CEO can go to the board and tell him that he sells a lot in the Caribbean. My God, when I saw how big everything was, I had, I don't know, an existential crisis going like, is this a problem so big that it should take my peace? I mean, no, man. Um, but going into other realms, in astrology, astronomy, there's so much to dig, man. I don't know what I think about astrology. I tell you, I'm a bit confused about it. There's so much information. It involves archetypes, psychology. Sometimes is I feel like the answers of some astrologers is like this cap that you buy that one size fits all. It's like, okay, Christian, so next month is gonna be a challenging month. I'll tell you that. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. A challenging month could be tomorrow or next month. Or Christian, at the end of the year, there's a good news are coming your way. That's like a probabilistic analysis, you could have it anytime. So I don't know, there's so much going on there that I don't have like a strong criteria when it comes to astrology, because some things I think they're correct, some things I don't know what you feel
No,
like.
I think, well, I didn't know what it was. I don't think anybody has a. It's one of those things that is not defined but used all the time. So when you think of astronomy is well defined. Astronomy is just like the
Yes.
measurements. You take pictures of the celestial bodies and you say where they are, basically, and like basically that's it. Um, Astrology adds more meaning to it, but it's very unclear what it's you're supposed to do with that meaning, and so I didn't know what it was, and there are no good explanations for it. Like even like listening to people who talk about this stuff a lot, it's not necessarily. It doesn't give me the answer of like what is this. So I had to sort of come up with my own answer of what it is, and I think I have an idea now that makes me more um, appreciative of some of the stuff that astrology is trying to do, because I've come to understand it as a mechanism for a storytelling mechanism to compress as much information about the world into as few things as possible. And so you're trying to, if you think about like how human knowledge evolved, it's very easy to take for granted the internet or a library or any kind of way we study today did not exist 500, certainly 1,000 years ago. There were like you couldn't read. I mean, like you couldn't even like you couldn't if you can access all of human knowledge in any language today, and AI will translate it for you. And so we live in this very distorted time. We have no idea what it was like before writing, where there were generations upon generations of uh, lessons to pass on from one generation to another, and you needed to just pack as much punch as you could into gather round children, story time, and the village elder will tell a story to the kids for generations. This is like hundreds of thousands of years, like from when we're able to speak to when
Right.
we're able to write. And then the same stories become these lightning rods for more meaning. So then you can have you know, you're trying to explain how the mass of Jupiter actually defends, the Earth from so many comets. And like you could imagine the Greeks had access to that. They knew that, but instead of it being like a story about the mass of the thing that like if you calculate the amount is that makes it inaccessible. If you tell the story about how brave Jupiter arrived and sort of like set everything in order, that's a much different story, and it's in a story that everybody can relate to. um, and that's also a big difference is it tries to compress all of human knowledge um, into these stories that put you at the center because you are engaging with these things. You're engaging with like the
Yes.
personality archetypes of the world, the tyrant, the leader, the messenger, the angry one, the beautiful one. Like these are very like they're like quick, what you call it, um, rules of thumb for how to interact with the world. And then I'm thinking, okay, there's some merit to that. I think that like modern science is a problem where you have incredibly sophisticated knowledge about the world, but it's so inaccessible to most people. Like you read a math paper, a PhD math paper, and you have no idea what they're saying, and no, it definitely doesn't make connect with me in any way. So I think there's something merit worthy uh, of that ambition.
Yeah, maybe trying to. I mean, astronomy. You have mathematicians. You have formulas. You have empiric data. In astrology, you have interpretations. Sometimes,
Yeah,
and I think you said the core of it. When they read to you astrology, they put you at the center of it. That's why it's so engaging. Also, astrology. A lot of people use it. I feel like a coping mechanism. Like, tell me,
yeah,
how am I? What's gonna happen? And you're gonna be open to everything again because what you said, you're the center of it. And
yeah,
it, maybe it was an effort to, or I think you said it. Maybe it was an effort to make this empiric information more digestible and add storytelling. I think I'm paraphrasing you right now, but maybe that's
no, yeah, you got it.
how astrology started. But there's a huge community for that. Oh my gosh. And they pay for mediums, and they pay for tarot, and for all this
Yeah,
kind of shenanigans they pay a lot of money. And yeah, it's like an elder. It's like the function of an
yeah.
elder, that he's kind of telling you what to do. And I remember this story. I read this book from Eric Fromm. He was a psychiatrist, and it's called the Art of Love. And he analyzes love from a scientific way.
Hmm.
He ran out of Nazi Germany, no, out of Nazi Europe. He ran to Mexico and the U.S. And he's one of my favorite authors. And in the Art of Love, he talks about the anxiety crisis that the Mayans and all civilizations had, and their way of curating this person that came. And I don't know what's going on. I'm so, because they didn't have the words for saying you had an existential crisis right now. And so he would say what the elder or the shaman would suggest is for them to go to an orgy. Imagine that, because in an
What?
orgy they would be connected with other persons. And because an existential crisis is fueled by separateness, an existential crisis is fueled by you lacking love and lacking connection. So what they would suggest is, but I'm telling you, not because they were right, because at the moment that's what they thought it was right, for them to go and connect with other persons via sexually, via physically. But that's what it would help. So what I'm telling you with this is, we all have different things for coping with reality. Maybe some of them is astrology. Back at the time, it was an orgy, and they were not wrong. because existential crisis, like I'm telling you, is and Fromm talks explains it in the book. Like your first existential crisis, Christian, that you had, maybe you don't remember it, but it was like in the third or fifth month of when you were alive, is when you are conscious that you're not part of your mom, that you're an
Mm,
independent entity. That's where you have this boom of separateness going through you that, oh my God, I'm an independent thing. And how you're cured, or that's what Eric Fromm says, that how you're cured from existential crisis is with connection and with love, but not receiving love. Christian is with giving love, is the action of it, not
mm.
not receiving it. I went all out, but it's because I wanted to connect with how people cope with different kind of things, and that's what the Mayans and the old civilizations were saying back, that go to an orgy. And maybe in modern world, because people are also fighting with religion and with faith, is like, Christian, you feel a bit bad, go and visit your community astrologer.
No, I will say I did not expect the conversation to go this way, but I'm I'm happy to be a platform for sophisticated listening. um, I know at least one listener is gonna have a kick out of that. Um, the but this got me thinking. I think that there's stuff to be said about like the existential anxiety that like Camus is so good at expressing, or like these philosophers are very good at like, okay, but what is the meaning? What is the point? And then you get confronted with these things in life that sort of like put you in a state of fear. Um, I think there's yeah, I think that is the point of religion, is to help mitigate that. That life does have meaning and that does have purpose, and like this is what it's all aiming toward. Um, and I don't, I don't think it's um I think that is a noble goal. I think that it's a noble goal to really try and figure out what's happening and really try and figure out meaning. And if you find something that really serves you, to share that with other people. I think that's very commendable. I think obviously when you get into the institutional aspects of it and it becomes, the pathological people are attracted to it, then it becomes more complicated. And then you have corruption, and then you have all these kinds of horrible power things going on. But it got me thinking. Like, there's two threads that I want to continue on, because um, one of them is the fact that like things like astrology uh, live on today in not just in directly astrology, but they've informed so much of the modern world. Like Greek mythology is so present in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is so present, like in the calendar is the Catholic Church invented the calendar, and why are there 12 months? And those questions, like it sort of echoes back into time forever. Um, so even though like we can have sort of our perceptions about how we should engage with them, there's no denying that they affect reality and like the mythology that we live in as a whole. Which goes to my question, which I think is like, now that I'm thinking about this, is an incredibly interesting person that I can ask you specifically, being from Guatemala. How does the Mayan heritage live on today in Guatemala or in the world, in your opinion?
Well, unfortunately, Christian, in Guatemala, we live like a double morale. Some of us are not proud of our Mayan heritage. Some of us are lacking of knowledge of all the Mayan heritage, which was huge. It still lives in food, in customs, in people. I mean, there's a huge percentage of the population of Guatemala are indigenous. A double morale, or a double hypocrisy, or double coin, you can say it, is that I feel we're lacking of people to be proud of the Mayan heritage, and to, I don't know, to be more knowledgeable of what happened and how it can spread and become stronger. Um, it, it's sad. I tell you, it's sad because, well, the Mayans, they were the scientifics of astronomy, of math, of urbanistic technology, how to create cities, how to move water from places to places, how to even war technology, plant technology, natural medicine. I mean, the Mayans, many of them were true scientifics and true pioneers in many branches. But I feel that we're not very proud of it, or that some politicians uh, have made this observation that I think I agree that we lack of of historic memory. We
Mm-hmm.
forget too fast. We forget too fast.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it's present in Guatemala, but it could be more present. It could be more viral. It could spread more. But it's still present, I would say. Yeah,
No,
and
and because it's one of those things that in the world, like in the history of humanity, Mayan culture has a very special place. And you still hear the echoes of the value of Mayan culture, whether it be in the Mayan calendar, the Mayan mythology, or of course like the architectural works that we're still beginning to discover all of them, right? Like like they get discovered basically once every 5 years. We find a whole new pyramid under the jungle that is a human, what do you call it, or one of those like UNESCO World Heritage things, right? Um, but the
yeah,
the reason I'm interested, go for it, go for it.
no, I feel that Mexico, Guatemala, we should be spokesman of the Mayan culture, and we should be more proud, and we should be more knowledgeable. I'm including myself there, but this is what makes us different. But we should be like, shouting from all of the mountains and volcanoes about this culture, and we're not. Um, and like, I don't know, making a relationship with what we were talking about, faith and church and religions. There are many institutions like the church that are losing strength in the modern world. That's why astrology is so popular. That's why modern philosophy is so popular. That's why you have all these gurus and leaders that are so popular, because the institutions that used to have the strength, they don't have it anymore, or maybe they lack leadership or new ways of adapting to younger audience. I don't know, but there's a huge shift going on. And I speak a lot about faith actually in Artisan Soul, but I don't speak it from a religious point of view. I speak it like in a life changing way, like faith in you, faith in your job, faith in your purpose, faith in life. And if you believe in God, could be faith in God also. But I think there's a major shift going on when it comes to the spiritual realm. Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know what are your thoughts on that, but things are changing.
Oh, and I see it happening in every dimension for every institution. I think governments are less credible than they used to be. Uh, Militaries are less credible than they used to be. Universities are less credible than they used to be. Corporations are less credible than they used to be. So there's like this
Mhm.
erosion of trust that I think is like very terrifying, because it's also one of those things where like in a dynamic system you cross a threshold and it's going to be chaotic, right? Because the
Right.
things that you go to for truth no longer serve as truth, and the I mean, nobody really knows what's true, but if we agree something is true, we can reason around it, right? But if we can't agree on what's true, then it's a very difficult, you have to build the entirety of human language and understanding again. Um, I definitely see that happening everywhere. I definitely see that happening with religious institutions. Um, and it creates this platform for bad actors to take advantage of it too, right? So like so I think that there are many good, well-intentioned gurus who, and I say gurus quote unquote, like
Yeah.
role models, let's call them, who are actually earnestly giving it a shot and trying their best, and like they're actually doing the work. And then there's people who want to make a quick buck, and sometimes it's hard to tell the two.
It was, I think it was easier before. The
Yeah, simpler for sure.
simpler, clearer. I don't imagine. I don't know how the reality of my kids would be in a couple of years when they're born. But thinking about the TikTok era, the TikTok kids, the high school kids right now, my gosh, they live in such a confusing world. What you're saying, the credibility, the lack of importance of all these institutions make these people like float. I don't know, where should they go? Should I go to university? Well, I don't have the money. Like you were saying, I don't trust secondary, tertiary education anymore. What about a corporation? I don't know. I'm not aligned with the values of this
Mhm.
company. Damn. So what should I do? It's I think it's gonna be hard and hard for younger generations.
um, I think about this too, and I think about like whatever project mission I'm on now is like, okay, what is the core thread? Like, what is the like if you had to summarize and summarize and summarize, what are the things that keep coming out on top as the most important thing? Um, and you start with like a conversation about the chemical things going on in the brain, but then you distill it down to you know a network is strong because of connectivity. And so like if you're connected to the people around you, that gives strength, and that gives resilience, and that gives community. And so there's like all these lessons that you can keep extracting from anything that I think are very important. The reason I asked you the Mayan question is because I think there's something very interesting that goes on in every Latin American's upbringing, where there's a very strong melting pot of uh, the native culture, the Catholic Church, and whatever waves of other European or even Asian immigration happened at different stages, right? And there's a tension there because like there was this whole process of dominance going on in many different ways, like whether it be military dominance, or it be cultural dominance, or it be capital dominance. Like if you think about corporate Coca-Cola trying to sell more Coke in Guatemala, like
Right.
that is a kind of tension there. And in the case of Paraguay, where I'm from, there's a very unique mythology of how we relate to the Guarani identity. Um, and it is
Okay.
very like the Guaranis are very resilient, unbelievably resilient. Like like it will be the end of time, and the Guaranis will just still be there hanging out. Um, and obviously that comes with very positive things, because it like the Guarani is an incredibly friendly culture and like welcoming culture, and like I say we, but growing up in Paraguay, but like we love everybody. Um, and the flip side of that is that we're very stubborn in our ways, and so like a lot of things that the modern world thinks of like inefficiency or organization or like hierarchy, it just doesn't work in with Guarani culture. And so there's a sense of like laggardness that is associated with the Guarani culture, especially when comparing it to, I mean, there are no great architectural artifacts. There are no great traces of a ancient civilization that and so I was wondering what that difference would be with a culture that did have that, like with Mayans having like works of architecture that we couldn't replicate today. uh, and trying to understand what that difference was. The more I come to appreciate, the more time goes on, the more I come to appreciate the special place that a culture like the Guarani culture, which is unbelievably beautiful and unbelievably funny, have in the world, even though the ways of expressing it aren't necessarily fully compatible with the modern Western world. And that's a tricky thing to walk, right? Because it's two cultures and you're sort of like blending them at the same time. So that's why I was wondering about your thoughts on the Mayan culture.
Well, that connects to. I will tell you, living in this type of countries gives you a big perspective on life, because there's a lot of inequality, and you have this melting pot that you mentioned about indigenous, European descendants, and the international community. When you see all these people interact, uh, when you see the inequalities, when you see how there's people that live with under $1 a day here, and people that live with, I don't know, more than $500 per day, you see like that broad spectrum, those extremes. You learn a lot. I feel like, in my upbringing, I used to live in a medium to low income neighborhood, but I would go to high school to, I don't know, like the most expensive private school in the country. So I would have those different perspectives, like the values of my friends in the neighborhood, the values of my friends in school, how they see things. Um, this is, well, my own experience, but it makes you acknowledge things different. It makes you a bit more alert. It helps you to read people better. Um, I think this type of exposure of many persons in third world countries or in Latin countries to different realities makes you more awake. I feel makes you more grounded, makes you know what is worth it. Um, and I would say something like an edge it gave me, an advantage, is how to read people, how to understand what people are gonna do, how are they moving, what are their intentions. Because here I am in a well cared, nurturing private school, and there in the other side, I'm playing with my friends in the neighborhood, and there's people like coming up to us, like talking about, I don't know, people that we don't know who they are. So it gives you an advantage. It Yeah, it opens your mind. It opens your eye a lot. And that, when I sum it up with the exposure I had internationally in Asia and the Caribbean and Europe, I'm happy. I had that type of childhood, being exposed to different realities. I don't know if that was your case, or if you were also nurtured, and your personality was strength, became stronger by you interacting with people from a lot of social economic realities, or from other countries.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's hard to even begin to quantify the effect that it has. I A funny story is that uh, I don't know how funny it is, but I my dad, when he was 16, he went on a an exchange program to Switzerland where he learned French. And when I turned 16, this is, very kindly, my parents for Christmas gifted me a winter, exchange program to Switzerland. But I
Oh,
was in a position where I was 15 or 15 or 16, and I was like, no, but it's the summer, in Paraguay, it's the summer then, and it's like, oh no, and I have a crush, and what am I gonna do with my crush, and so I resisted it, and eventually, the right choice won out, and I ended up going to Switzerland for like a 3 month exchange, and um, it changed my life. It 100% changed my life. I learned a new language. I learned a new way about, how society could function. If you think about how different Switzerland and Paraguay are, like, it's as different as you can imagine. And and culturally too, like what values people use to convey for rhetoric. Like if I want to convince you of something in Paraguay, it's very different than the words I use and the strategy I use to convince you if you're in Switzerland, right? Um, and and so it's set up for like it was shock for sure, but I always took it as an adventure. Like I'm learning a new language. Um, but when it comes down to the unifying thing, this goes back to your point before when you're like, okay, so how do I make this value set or how do I merge these two value sets? Which one of them is like the right one? Or how do I think about how to apply the right one? That's a very difficult process. Like that's a very difficult process. It happened to me again when I came to the US for school. And then I find myself like very naturally gravitating to the values of the place that I'm in. And not till much later was I like, I have to be intentional about how do I incorporate the best parts of all of my experiences.
Right.
Uh, and but yeah, yeah, I get a sense that there's it just goes back to the idea of how big the world is, and the world is so gigantic, and there are problems that are so much more heartbreaking than ours, and there are victories that are so much more amazing than ours, and so then like it's nice to be able to say like, okay, this is the world that I live in, and this is like how I'm going to try and do well and do good in it. um
True.
Pablo, before we wrap up, what's top of mind for you? What's next for you? What are you thinking about? Um,
Eh,
these next few months, this year.
well, Christian, you're part of the plan. You're part of the plans, man. Um,
Love to hear that.
well, my company, Autentico Media, we produce content and we produce podcasts for people in Mexico, in Central America, and Guatemala. And we want to make the step and start helping clients, helping people, companies in the US. I think we've been in the podcast industry for a while, and we can find clients over there that could use our help. So that's one of the one of the objectives of the first 6 months of this year is to start getting clients in the US. Um, another 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 objective is for Alma Artesana, Artisan Soul, to keep expanding. Next week, we're going to El Salvador. We booked an Airbnb, which we're going to transform to a studio for 10 days, and we're going to be interviewing a lot of our Salvadorian brothers over there. And in May, we're going to Mexico to do some interviews. Well, Mexico is huge, so the logistics is a bit funny and
Hmm.
complicated. But if you ask me, that's part of the objectives: expanding our show, the show of the house, Alma Artesana, and expanding Autentico Media to other countries, and keep implementing. I don't know, new projects. Always be creating, brother. Always be creating.
Hmm.
Think. I live by this, and it says think less, create more. Because if you have in Spanish, the translation would be "la cosa mata el pensamiento," and that's like the thing kills the thought. Like take it out, verbalize it, write it, do it, but don't let it mingle in your brain for too much because it's gonna eat you alive. It's gonna consume you, brother. So yeah, that's part of our plans for this year.
I love to hear. I love to hear. I'm excited for Autentico Media and all the um, all the growth you guys are gonna have. I think it's such an emerging medium, and you're definitely ahead of the curve in terms of like figuring out all of you know the logistics and the steps required to get high quality content out there. Um, this was great. I really appreciate the time. Like I'm confident we'll do this more than once.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm open for round two whenever and whatever, man. Thank you. Thank you
Hell
for
yeah.
the invitation. I love your project. I love your mind, and I'm waiting for you to publish that book and to keep creating. I've listened to many of your podcasts. I mean, you have really amazing guests, man. So I'm honored that you invited me to your show. And just let's keep creating, brother. Thank you.
Oh yeah. See you next time.
See you next time, man. Have a great day. Bye.